Hi boys and girls, welcome to your second reading lesson of this week. Yesterday we began our second book in our book series, Frankly Franny, called Check Please. This week we are focusing on noticing similarities in our characters across a book series. We're focusing on Franny. What you'll want to be thinking about is what is the same about Franny in each book. Yesterday you probably took a look at our graphic organizer and started writing down similarities, and I gave you an example. One example that I noticed in both books is that Franny uses nonsense words. Nonsense words are basically made-up words. Franny makes up tons of words. Some examples of those words are machillion and humiliafied and shockified. Those aren't real words. She just kind of makes them up, and that's kind of her own language. That's one similarity that I noticed in both books. She was using these nonsense words in our last Frankly Franny book and this book, Check Please. I wrote that down on my graphic organizer. As we continue to read today, I want you to keep thinking about those similarities that you notice. So yesterday we stopped in the middle of chapter 2. Do you remember what happened with Franny when we stopped reading? Yeah, she dropped a plate of spaghetti all over Mrs. P's nice white shoes. I asked you to think about what is going to happen to Franny. Knowing what you know about our last book that we read when Franny got in trouble, what do you think will happen to her? We'll have to keep reading to find out. Franny, my mom shouted, crashing her palm against her forehead. That is when the entire world stopped breathing and the whole cafeteria, including the really teenaged girl, turned to stare at me. My face turned tomato sauce red. Mrs. P was staring at her feet. It was horrendous. I have never been so humiliated in my whole life, and that is not an opinion. The plate was very hot, I tried to explain. That's exactly why you're not supposed to touch it, Mrs. P said, raising her voice a little bit. I'm sorry, Mrs. P, I told her. I'll help you clean it up. I think you've done enough already, Franny, Mrs. P said in you stay right where you are, young lady voice. My mom was already on the floor with some paper towels, and Tinley came rushing out with a mop. I did not even want to turn and see what Elliot's expression looked like. Mrs. P, I am so sorry, my mom said. I insist that you send me the bill for the cleaning. Oh, that's okay, Mrs. P told her. I never wear my good things to school anyway. Nevertheless, my mom began. Nevertheless is a really grown-up word I have to remember to use more oftenly. Why don't you go wash up and I'll take over for you? You wouldn't mind? Of course not. It's the least I can do. Then Mrs. P turned to me and said, Franny, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to sit out for the rest of the spaghetti lunch. That is when my mouth almost fell down to my own shoes. I looked at my mom. That's a very lenient punishment, Franny, my mom explained. Lenient meant that's not a very bad punishment at all. I knew the word lenient from the last time I was punished, which was exactly not long ago. Mrs. P pointed to a very strict chair in the most boring section of the cafeteria. It was all the way off in the corner where nothing ever happened. And I'd like you to think about the difference between good helping and bad helping. Is that clear? I nodded my head yes. Okay, Mrs. P, I said. I'm sorry about your shoes and pants. I really am. I will go think about some differences now in the boring area. And that is when I slunked my way over to the bad section. I sat there for 3 months and 4,000 years. Mrs. P came back from the bathroom and cleaned up, but with spaghetti stains. Then she clapped twice to get our attention. Okay, class, let's line up and take a bow, because we did such a great job. I love bows. I jumped right out of my boring seat and ran over to stand next to Elliot. And that is when the second more horrendous thing happened. Mrs. P turned to me and said in a really strict way, Franny, please go back to your seat. I'll tell you when it's time to get up. I could not in a million years believe this. Elliot's mouth almost fell off his face at the same time as mine. I was shockatified. I did not know that punishments were more important than bows. I slunked back to my chair and watched my entire class take a really important bow without me. I could tell that Elliot was upset that I wasn't next to him. I knew because he didn't bow as hard as I've ever seen him bow in the past. The whole world of the cafeteria clapped for the good job my class did. I love getting claps, but I didn't do a good job. So I didn't get any. I was very angryified at myself for spilling hot spaghetti all over Mrs. P's clothes. I was never going to touch a hot plate ever again, not in a bajillion years. Chapter 3. My mom was still upset with me when it was time for the raffle. She was a really fancy kind of mad. She was cross. Cross is worse than angry because I don't really know what it means. We settled into our seats in the auditorium, and Elliot and I jittered our legs with excitement. I felt my belly fill up with moths and butterflies. Interesting, I feel like in the last book I also heard something about moths and butterflies. Sounds like a similarity to me. Even though I was being crossed at, I still wanted my mom to win the raffle. She didn't know that Elliot and I put her name in the big jug. She also didn't know we owed Millicent's mom $1, but I would tell her later. If she won, then she'd be less grumpy and maybe she'd uncross herself at me. There was a lot of chattering, and then soon everyone went really quiet. Millicent's mom came on the stage carrying a big jug with millions of papers stuffed inside. Millicent stood next to her. For once, her head was not in a book. Maybe Millicent loves her mom more than she loves books. Then, before the big raffle for the families, Millicent's mom held up the jelly bean jar that we guessed at. We had a lot of fine guesses, but no one guessed the exact number, she told us. That sentence got a big groan. There are 409 jelly beans in here. The person with the closest guess was only 12 jelly beans off. At 421, our winner is Franny B. Miller. Franny, please come to the stage and collect your prize. It is a scientific fact that I have never won anything before. I was so nervous to go up on the stage alone that I grabbed Elliot's hand and made him come with me. Congratulations, Millicent's mom said into the microphone as she handed me the extremely heavy jar. Thank you for your congratulations, I said back into the microphone. Then added, Elliot guessed 422, so I'm going to share this with him. And that was when the crowd applauded, actually. Can you even believe the fact? Not only was I the winner of 409 jelly beans, but I was the winner of clapping. It certainly made up for losing out on spaghetti lunch clapping. Then Millicent's mom announced that it was time for the big dinner raffle, and Elliot and I went back to our seats. She made it sound like we were getting to eat at the balloon restaurant, but the best part of the entire raffle was it's a scientific fact that it was not. Someone in the audience made a drum roll sound. Millicent's mom stuck her hand in the jug. After feeling around for nearly 50 hours, she pulled out a piece of paper. And you'll never believe what I'm about to tell you. That piece of paper she pulled out looked exactly like the white piece of paper Elliot wrote my mom's name on. It took her 37 hours to unfold the piece of paper and a century before she read it out loud. Well, what do you know, she said with what a coincidence voice. The winner of the dinner raffle is none other than Anna Miller, Franny Miller's mother. Everyone in the audience clapped. I looked over at my mom, whose face was bright red and twisted with confusified expression. And that's when I gave her my big, that's right, I entered you in the raffle while you were trying to find a parking spot smile. She gave me a very big smile back and grabbed my hand. That was a very thoughtful thing to do, Bear, she whispered in my ear as she led me back to the stage. That was when my heart almost exploded out of my chest. On stage, my mother collected the gift certificate and then said thank you into the microphone, and we went back to our seats. Then she whispered to me, "It's a French restaurant." 2 seconds before I didn't even care about eating at a fancy restaurant. But now I couldn't wait. That was when I squeezed my mom's hand, which told her in no words how excited I was, nevertheless. Chapter 4. That night at dinner, I showed my dad the big jar with my half of the jelly beans. Showing my dad was one of the hugest mistakes of my career because he acted just like he did with the Halloween candy. I was allowed to scoop out one handful, and then he'd hold on to the rest until I was allowed another scoop. It is a scientific fact that I planned on scooping out the best, biggest handful of jelly beans ever. And that is not an opinion. Plus, I was going to hide the jelly beans all over the house so they would last forever. After my dad put the jelly bean jar away, me and my mom told him about the fair. Me and my mom told him all about the fair, my IOU, which my mom paid back, and even the best part about spaghetti on Mrs. P's shoes. But I already got in trouble about that, I told him, in case he ever wanted to punish me about it all over again. Did you get a fair punishment? He asked. Yes, I said, and very quickly changed the subject before he and my mom had the chance to send brain messages to each other that my punishment really was too lenient. And my mom won a raffle. My dad looked at her and she gave him the hugest smile. You'll never guess what it is, she said. A new car? Dad asked. Nope, Mom answered. Dad, try again. A new house? Nope, Mom said. $14 billion? He tried one last time. Then my mom leaned in and put her hand on his and said, Dinner at Baloo. It is a scientific fact that the dinner at Balloon is not better than $14 billion. But the way my mom said it seemed like it was. Well, I'll be, my dad said, slapping his hand down on the table. The chef is supposed to be amazing, my mom told him. But I haven't seen a word about it from any of the food critics. It might be too early for them to send a food critic, my dad said. What in the world wide of America were they talking about? What is a food critic? I asked. A food critic is someone who eats at restaurants and writes about the food and service. Is this a real, life, actual job? I asked. Yes, it is, my mom told me. Do food critics have offices? My parents looked at each other with question mark faces. I think they probably write in an office, yes, my mom said. In my entire life as a person, I had never heard about people eating for their actual job. But a food critic sounded like the most spectacular job in the world wide of America. It was very easy to picture myself as a food critic. I saw myself sitting alone in the middle of a long rectangular table, while waiters put one plate of food after another in front of me. The customers were all turned to face me, like an audience at the theater, and everyone was very quiet while I chewed. After every bite, I announced to the restaurant what I thought about the food, and all the eaters would ooh and ah, and maybe even clap. But then I was a little stumpified. But how do you describe the taste of food? Well, take this soup for example. Why don't we all have a sip and describe the taste to one another? My mom suggested. My dad, Mom, and I scooped a big spoonful of the most delicious vegetable soup that my dad made. My mom said, this soup is comforting and reminds me of sitting in front of the fireplace with my two favorite people. My dad said, to me, the soup tastes light and airy, not too watery, salty, but flavorful, and it hits the spot. And then I said, it tastes like carrots, celery, zucchini, and clear broth. I looked down at the soup to make sure I wasn't leaving anything out, and then quickly added, and rice. My parents smiled because they knew I was exactly right. Good job, Franny, my dad said, and I smiled from one side of our house to the other. I loved when my dad good job Franny'd me. I took another sip and they looked at me and waited. It was just like I imagined it would be at the restaurant where I was working as a food critic. I swished it around my mouth and chewed on all the vegetables, swallowed, and then looked up at the ceiling until I had the perfect description. The taste I taste is a soupy taste, I told them with a very professional voice. That's a good start, Bird, my dad said. My dad is the only person who calls me that. It is a scientific fact that Bird is my middle name, but please do not tell anyone. Vegetable soupy, I added. Then I saw the pride on my dad's face after I said vegetable soupy. I knew right then and there I was meant to be a food critic. Chapter 5, which is what we are going to start with tomorrow. So boys and girls, I have a fun activity for you guys today. I want to talk a little bit about the school fair that Franny's school had. They had some sort of spaghetti lunch, right, that Franny and Elliot participated in. Your activity for today is you're going to plan your own school fair. So you are going to make a poster about your school fair. In the plan for today, Wednesday, there is a list of everything you want to include on your poster. For example, you want to create your school name, the date and time, and what kinds of activities you'll have at the school fair. You'll also want to pick a theme for your school fair. So for example, Franny's school picked spaghetti lunch. Now you could pick carnival, or you could pick ice cream. You could pick anything you want. It's your school fair. And once you're done with your poster, make sure that you email it to me or Mrs. Belford so we can take a look at your creative school fair posters. I hope you enjoyed this reading for today. Stay safe and healthy. I will see you tomorrow. Bye guys.